Well, hello everybody, this is Jeff Wydell. Welcome to another Henrico's Environmental Action Resource Team podcast. I really appreciate you joining us today, and we're going to talk about something that's related to the H.E.A.R.T committee, which is water. And here is a guest that we have today. It's Kristin Owen. Kristin is the Floodplain and Dam Safety Manager for the Department of Public Works for the county. Kristin, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff.
So I understand that you have a flood of information you want to get to us.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be talking about the county's flood risk management programs. Tell me what you all do.
So the floodplain management program does a few things related to flooding. First is we manage our National Flood Insurance Program participation, which gives all of our residents access to flood insurance in the county, disaster assistance if you get flooded or even some other kind of hazard. And then it also gives us access to certain federal and state grants and loans. So we do that. And then we also permit development as part of that, so making sure that any development in the floodplain or near it is safe and not going to increase flooding on anyone else. We manage our floodplain maps, and so that shows where our flood risk is. So people can go and look at that and figure out, what their risk is for their house, maybe their commute, kind of get an idea of where flooding might occur. And then really we're here to help make sure that the community stays resilient and that we're protecting people from flooding and reducing our flood risk, but also as a resource to the public to answer questions about flooding, flood insurance, floodplain planning, really anything flooding kind of goes.
So you had mentioned that FEMA updates flood risk maps. Tell me about that, and how often does it happen? Where can people get access to those?
Yeah, so in Henrico, we actually have two different floodplains. We have FEMA floodplain maps, which is what most of the country has, and then we also have community floodplain maps, so where the FEMA maps stop, we continued mapping. So FEMA updates their maps every few years. There's not really a schedule to it. Our last maps were updated in 2007, and so we are getting new maps now. The process is pretty long. Our 2007 maps actually started about in like 1999, and then these maps with FEMA started in 2016. So it's been a while, but we're finally to the point to where we're getting new ones, and they actually go effective April 25th.
Oh,
so
okay,
yeah.
Good. And so a question I have is, if you are a resident or if you're a business, how do you know if you're in a floodplain?
Well, the first thing would be to go look at our online map. We have a flood zone and dam safety information map. It's on the Public Works site. So you can go and put in your address or your GPIN, your parcel number, and search, or you can just zoom in and look around the map and find it. So we have all of the flood zone information there. If you look at our main GIS viewer that's on the homepage of our website, you can find it there too. They're just not turned on by default. But it is important to note that Virginia is a buyer beware state. So if you are buying or selling property, you're not necessarily going to be told. It's up to you, as the buyer to figure out if if you're in the flood zone or not. So a lot of times people find out at closing when they're buying a house because there might be a flood insurance requirement that comes into play. So definitely go check out the map, look and see if you're in it or if you're near it. The flood zones are based on what we call the 1% annual chance flood or a 100-year flood. And that just means that there's a 1% chance of it happening in any given year. So it doesn't mean it will happen once every 100 years. It could happen 2 years in a row, could not happen for 20 years. We don't really know. But there are other flooding events that happen more frequently, just from rainstorms and things like that. And we see that a lot when we have a lot of heavy rain.
So if you live in a flood risk area, is it in the county or the state or federal, is it required that you have flood insurance?
So if you live in a FEMA floodplain, that special flood hazard area, and you have a federally regulated mortgage, so basically any loan from an FDIC bank, then you are required to have flood insurance. If you do not have that mortgage or some other kind of loan, then it's not mandatory. Your lender, you could be outside of that area and your lender could still require you to get it, even though it's not federally mandatory. I haven't seen that happen a lot. But we do strongly recommend that you get flood insurance. So homeowners insurance doesn't typically cover flood damages.
Right.
So if you do get a flood, it's probably not going to get covered, and that's something that you would have to, make sure that you have money available to deal with and recover from.
Right.
But we also have data from FEMA that shows that over 40% of the claims that they're getting are actually outside of those mapped areas. So we always recommend it. Anywhere it can rain, it can flood, but it's not mandatory.
Right. So what is involved with determining what kind of insurance you can apply for, the cost of it, and I understand that there's a rating system the county's involved with that can affect that, right?
Yeah. So flood insurance, there are a lot of different factors that go into how it's rated. Part of it is how close you are to the flooding source, so like the stream, the elevation of the structure, how the structure is built. You'd really need to talk to your insurance agent to have them go through and get a quote and get information on that. But there are First, I want to just mention with the new maps, FEMA actually provides a discount. It's called the newly mapped discount if you are a property owner whose structure is being added for the very first time. So if you've never been in the floodplain before and now your home is being added or your business, you can get this newly mapped discount. And so that would be something to talk to your insurance agent about. The other thing you mentioned, though, is the Community Rating System Program, or CRS. So that's something that we've been working on for really the last 4 years. And we are finally in, sort of, I guess. It goes effective October 1st, 2024. So we have our rating, and we came in with a rating of a Class 5 asterisk, which means that we actually have enough points for a Class 4, but we need to meet some additional prerequisites. So what does that actually mean? So a Class 5 means that we will get a 25% discount on flood insurance premiums. So that's NFIP flood insurance, and it will apply to anyone in the county that has a policy, whether you're in the floodplain or not. So that discount will automatically go into effect October 1st for any new policies. And then if you have an existing policy in place, it will go into effect when your policy renews. So if somebody is getting a policy like this month because of the new maps, then they won't see that discount until next year when it renews, but it will automatically go into effect.
So there's no opportunity for people to say, hey, what about, when I first started my policy kind of thing? Okay, cool. So you mentioned, again, the numbering system. What is involved with determining what rating the county gets from FEMA?
So it's a pretty complicated program. The manual is about 3 or 4 inches thick of all the things that you can do. But basically, we get points for all the different activities that we do. So all the things that we do to try to reduce our flood risk and create a comprehensive floodplain management program and protect our environment. So some of the things that we get credit for are like our higher regulatory standards, so how we manage development, open space preservation, so any properties, whether we own them or others own them, if it's being protected in the floodplain, we can get credit for that. If we do different mitigation actions, so that could be planning, like we are part of a regional hazard mitigation plan, and we get points for that. But it can also be like if we buy out structures, or build certain projects to mitigate flooding, we can get credit for those things. And then we also get credit for outreach and education. So we will be doing a lot of education throughout the years, and we sent letters related to the map updates, but we'll keep doing that related to just floodplain management in general. So each activity is worth a certain amount of points, and then each rating class is 500 points. So every class you go up is an additional 5% discount.
Wow. And so we just got into this program, right?
Yes.
And is that unusual for us to come in, for a locality to come and do a program right out of the gate with a number 5 asterisk?
Yes. So a lot of communities will join it at a class 8 or 9. So this program's kind of like golf. The lower the number, the better it is. So the classes are a 1 to 9. So 1 being the highest with a 45% discount, 9 being the lowest with a 5% discount. So a lot of communities will join it at that 9 or 8. That's kind of the easiest way to get in. Not a lot join at a 5. The highest in Virginia previously came in at a 7. The highest we have in Virginia at all is a 5 asterisk. So we're coming in at the same level as the highest in the state, but we're actually the first in the country to join this high under the current program.
Really?
Wow. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting.
And this kind of just to me, it's another example of the county that's really trying to do the best they can to make it a good area for the citizens to live.
Yeah, really. I mean, so the one thing about the C.R.S program is it gives you this discount, but it really is intended to create this comprehensive program to make sure that we're reducing flood risk. So we don't have as many flood insurance policies in the county as, say a Virginia Beach or a Florida community or something on the coast. So that's not necessarily our incentive for doing it. It's great. We want to provide that discount, but it's really more so we want to make sure that we're actually reducing our flood risk and doing it in this good way.
Right. And speaking of that, what are some of the things, because I know recently, the last bond referendum that was voted on, one of the elements that was in there was funding for flood risk mitigation. Can you tell me some of the stuff that the county has done in general, that county has done to try to reduce flood risk in the county?
Yeah, so the drainage bond is being used for projects that address drainage. It's not always things in the floodplain. Sometimes that's more like stormwater type flooding events. So we do have a team working on that, and there have been a few projects that they've already started on that. Other things that we're doing, though, we're updating the maps to make sure that people know where the flood risk is and that it's accurate. So the FEMA maps we just talked about are just going effective. We're actually updating the community floodplains as well. So they should be finished, and I think in spring of next year is where we're at right now with the schedule. So that's one thing. And then we also are working on developing a floodplain acquisition program. So if there are property owners who maybe live in the floodplain and they've been having flooding and they want to get out, or like they can't sell their property because of the flood risk, we are interested in buying those properties so that we can convert it back to open space and then have our floodplains be a green space where they can flood. They're meant to flood, and we want to make sure that they have room to do that so that then everyone outside of it aren't dealing with flooding. We don't want our floodplains to keep getting bigger because we're filling them in. So that's one thing that we're doing. We've also been doing some planning, which sometimes doesn't seem as exciting as, like construction projects, but planning is really important long term, to make sure that we have a strategy for dealing with this and can do it in a way that will last. So we've got the hazard mitigation plan. We've got some of the planning things going on with the C.R.S program. And then we actually just got a grant to develop a countywide resilience plan. So that can go through and look at all the different things that we're doing on the county level, and including, some of the things that the H.E.A.R.T group is working on, and really just figure out where we want to go and how best we can tackle all of this.
Yeah. Well, I really like the idea that across the board, it really seems that the county is intentional about what we do. It's not just throwing Band-Aids at stuff. So you talked a lot about planning, although it's not a really exciting thing. It's necessary because, again, if you make something, you do a project that is completed in 2 years, but it's, number one, not effective, but doesn't last more than 4 years, then what's...
Right. Yeah. So, with the acquisition program, for instance, a lot of communities start it and just start buying properties, and then you end up with a lot of properties kind of everywhere, and then you can't really do anything with it. And so we're really trying to make sure that we build the administrative side of the program first so that we have a game plan, and then we can be more strategic with where we're buying them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't acquire properties somewhere, that's not necessarily where a bunch of other properties are, but we're trying to kind of figure out, like, okay, where do we have flooding problems, and where do we maybe already own property where we can maximize the space to be able to do something to reduce that flood risk. And it's really interesting. I've been talking to a lot of communities across the country, and nobody's really thinking about it this way. So we're kind of having to figure it out as we go. But it is interesting. And then the other thing that we're doing is having a lot of conversations about, like, what do we do with this property when we acquire it? Because we don't want to just buy property and then just have it. So we're trying to figure out how can we get the maximum amount of benefits with this. So if we're buying structures, then can the fire department or the police department use those structures for training and things before we actually demo them?
Right.
And then once we demo them, is it in an area where Rec and Parks might be able to do something, whether it's creating a new park or extending an existing one? Is it an area where we can do stream restoration projects or some other kind of nature-based solution so that we get the benefit of reducing our flood risk, but also being able to improve our water quality and get credits with Chesapeake Bay requirements so that we can, do other projects around the county and things like that. So, and then also figuring out making sure that the neighborhood is aware of this and on board with it and educated on what they're doing. And so we're really interested in finding what we're kind of calling local champions. And we're kind of mimicking it off of the Citizens Academy, but it will be flooding related. Right. So you can come in and learn and hopefully be our champions, to help spread the word with your neighbors and friends and family and, and just create the surround sound effect so hopefully everyone in Henrico will know what their flood risk is. And
so are these champions going to get gold belts or anything like that?
I mean, that would be cool. I really would love some T-shirts or something.
Awesome. Well, one of the things that's really cool in the tying into the H.E.A.R.T group itself is our for people that are not seeing the program and listening, we have our mascot Stuart on the table here, and one of his motto is reduce, reuse, recycle, and it sounds like that's exactly what's going on with this program. So you mentioned that part of this whole program is education, and part of the letters for H.E.A.R.T is resource. So where can people get information about these maps and just flood risk in general?
Yeah, so I would go to the Public Works webpage. We are located in the design division, and then you can find the floodplain management page. Honestly, the easiest thing is probably just to Google Henrico flood zones or Henrico floodplain management, and then you can find everything there. So we actually, for the map updates, created a separate subpage that's called FEMA Flood Map Updates, and it has all the information on there. The example letters that we sent out to property owners are on there. We have other resources. We created a social media kit for other partners to help us share information. We have a frequently asked question document, and we've actually translated that into the top 15 languages in the county. Fantastic. We really are trying to make this outreach as meaningful and inclusive as possible. We also have just an informational flyer, which is on the H.E.A.R.T website as well. And then some other information on there. We also have a help desk. We have a dedicated flood at henrico.us email, and then a phone number and an online form as well that you can submit inquiries to, and we'll respond to those. And then we also just have a bunch of other information on our floodplain pages, and that's where you can find the map as well.
Well, it seems to me like if we can mention to people, it's look, if the water's rising, don't worry, there's help on the way. So if you all who are listening and watching want more information about the H.E.A.R.T Committee, you can reach out to our website, and that's henrico.us/H.E.A.R.T. And Kristin, I'm really thankful that you were able to come out today to share all this information. It's been really good. So I appreciate you coming out, and we'll see you all next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
See ya.